Hello, my name is Charlie Miller, and I'm here interviewing Tina Wong. Today's date is Thursday, February 23rd, 2023, and we are interviewing via Zoom. The first question I'm going to ask you is your date and place of birth.
So my birthday is January 6th, 1995, and I was born in San Jose, California.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit about your parents and their occupations, and did they have any history in the military?
So my mother, she was born and raised in Vietnam, but she's of Chinese descent. She came to the United States in the 80s. She was a Vietnam War refugee. And when she arrived, she started out in the restaurant industry, but she eventually went and took classes to become an assembler in Silicon Valley. My father, he was born and raised in Hong Kong. And since he arrived in America after meeting my mother in the 90s, he started working in the restaurant business. And he did that. And now they're both retired.
Nice. And can you tell us like a little bit about like, did you have any, what schooling you had before entering the military or any jobs prior to entering the military?
Yes. Prior to the military, I was just in high school. I worked as a tutor throughout high school, but that was it.
All right. And I guess how did you initially get the idea like I want to join the service and be a part of that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I didn't have anybody in my family that was in the U.S. military. To my knowledge, I didn't even think that I had members in the military, members of my family in the military at all. Um, all I knew about the military, just in my community, was really the mere fact that my family members, my mother's side, were refugees of the Vietnam War. But to that, it was only to that extent that I really acknowledged it. Um, but anyway, I had never considered joining the military until I was having a rough time in high school, going through this weird existential crisis where um, I realized that a lot of the things that I was doing and saw others kind of doing around me because of the kind of culture that was perpetuated were all geared towards a lot of empty actions geared towards trying to spruce up their college applications and a little bit demoralized by that realization. Sort of fell into this rut of not really knowing what I wanted to do after high school and realizing that maybe college wasn't even for me as a first step. And in order to kind of I guess as a way for myself to kind of find a way out without having to make a whole big case for myself as to why I wasn't going to college, I decided that the military would be a good route.
And what was your family's like initial reaction to you saying that?
So, actually, as I mentioned, I was going through a bit of a rough time. So, I actually didn't tell my parents until the day before I was going to enlist. I had actually gone through the discovery process, uh, the whole, visiting the recruiter's office, learning about like what the military, honestly, what joining the military would be like. That whole ordeal I went through myself. I took the bus everywhere and did it all myself. Anyway, so my mother, so I she was not happy. She was very upset with me. She actually was in so much shock that she didn't speak to me for, well, I mean, I guess like a good part of the evening until my sister ended up talking to her. My dad, though, when I told him later that evening, um, I think he was under the impression that I was going to ask him if I could go to college out of state. And so he may actually like anticipating that kind of conversation. He had told me all the reasons why I shouldn't go to college out of state because it was expensive and it wasn't really something that we could afford or sustain and it would just be really far away and it wasn't a good option. And then so he had given all of these reasons why I shouldn't go to college out of state at least. And I ended up telling him, well, that's fantastic that you think that because I'm joining the military instead and I can pay for college. And then so if I wanted to go out of state, I could afford it. And so at that point, there was nothing else he could say. And he was just like, was not expecting that, but fine. I guess I kind of made the case for you.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit about like where you what recruiting office you went to, like where that was and kind of those initial conversations and I guess like what branch you decided to enter and why?
Yeah, honestly. So I was doing a lot of my research online before this. I had no idea what I was doing, but in my very, very limited research and with what little questions I, Googled essentially, I found that in breaking down the branches, the only differentiating factor for me really was my ability to choose my job. I had no idea about like, the different perceptions of the different branches of military other than, of course, like, flying, water, ground. But what drew me to the Army was really just like, from what I had read at least, and from what I had known, was that I would have a lot more autonomy in choosing my job.
And so what branch did you end up entering?
Oh, sorry. Yes. And so I only visited Army recruiters and I ended up joining the Army.
Nice. And I guess after that initial like signing up, where did you go? Did you start like training or?
Oh, so I had visited recruiters in San Jose in my hometown. And then, so I had enlisted. So I think officially I'd signed my contract in April, in my senior year of high school. And then I went to basic training in August.
And what was like the initial kind of impressions of basic training? Was it like a major culture shock for you?
So actually not it was certainly a shock. Well, it was certainly different. I think I kept waiting for the shock to actually happen. And I waited for it for 4 years and it never really came, to be honest. I thought it was really interesting because throughout my 4 years of experience, I felt that I never really felt like a service member. I never really felt like a soldier. I always felt like I was just somebody playing dress up, observing all of these service members around me. And I don't know. I just thought it was very interesting, but it was certainly very different. I think it was maybe more of not so much a shock because I was just so ready to experience something different at the end of the day.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
When you were talking about kind of it, are you saying that because you didn't feel at home there, or it was just so different that it couldn't feel normal? Does that make sense? I'm just trying to understand exactly what you're saying.
Oh, that is a great question. And by the way, there's a dehumidifier on. Can you hear something in the background? Okay, great. So yeah, that's a good question. So I mentioned that I had never had any desire to join the military. My only motivation was really to just have a paid ticket out of my hometown. So it was never part of my identity. I was the last person that I ever would have imagined joining the military, let alone everybody else around me. So I guess even once I, went through the whole process of basic training and all of that, no matter how hard I tried to drink the Kool-Aid, it just wouldn't settle in me to where it felt like this was authentically part of my identity. But in that, I realized, perhaps there was this idea of a soldier that I had in my mind that I simply was not. But in that, I had found, a different part of me in it.
Okay. I'm in that initial like training sessions, what were some of your what was an average day for you like from start to finish?
An average day, I honestly can't really remember. I remember waking up early and then just doing PT, and then whatever they had in store for the day was whatever they had in store for the day. Did some, I don't know. Honestly, it was different every day is really what it was. But what I did remember every day was like my experience from start to finish and how much I'd grown, because I knew absolutely nothing about the military and I had no idea what to expect. And that was actually part of the excitement for me, was not knowing what to expect and being okay with whatever I experienced. And then so in part of trying to feel like a soldier and in that search of trying to find that identity, I really embraced every part of the training that they threw at me. So I would try to, like when we were doing cadences, I would try to, scream, I don't know, what, say it the loudest or scream the loudest, yell the loudest, repeat the loudest. I was, always trying to be in front, trying to, despite being one of the smallest people in, like wherever I was in any company, I would, whatever roles people didn't want to take up, such as like, holding the guide on or doing some, I don't know, weird stuff, I would always try to take it up, just trying to, I was just completely shameless in everything I did is really what it was. And that's what I realized. And that's what I embraced. And I felt so empowered because I felt so invisible, restarting and resetting my identity because I was just thrown in a completely unknown world, that I felt so empowered that I could rebuild myself. And looking back and just kind of even just thinking about how much I had grown throughout basic training to from start to finish, I went from being, the most embarrassing kind of person out there who had absolutely no idea what she was doing, completely lost, to one of the most, I don't know, to remembering actually getting, being somewhat notable. And I was very, very proud of that.
Nice. And I guess what was the time frame for training? How long were you a part of that?
I think basic training, this is horrible. I actually don't remember how long it was, about 10 weeks maybe.
And where did you get your basic training?
Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
And was that like another extent to your training, or was that an assignment?
That was part of that was my basic training. And then I did my medic training in Fort Sam Houston in Texas.
So what was the kind of difference between the, I guess, medic stuff and the basic training? I guess, what were some of your assignments while you were doing medic training, and what were you training to be exactly?
Oh, okay. So the first half, I think the first 8 weeks or so of medic training, we were training to become, we were getting our civilian EMT licenses. And then the second half of our training, because AIT was 16 weeks long, we were practicing combat medicine and learning combat medicine. And so all of that training time was building on top of our basic training time, like all the fundamentals that we learned about being a soldier, like, marching, marching in step, cadences, shooting, all of the above. Wow, I'm probably a horrible soldier. I don't remember. But yeah, so I think AIT really just reinforced all of those fundamentals on top of like our technical skills.
And that like fields of like being a medic, was that something you chose to do, or was that kind of given to, why didn't you decide to go into another field of the Army?
Yeah. So when I was in the recruiting office, I guess according to the recruiters that were there, they let me know that my options were between 3 jobs: medic, intel, and cryptolinguist. And when it came down to it, I had no idea what any of these jobs looked like or entailed, but I chose to become a medic because it sounded the least like a desk job, even though I had no way of really, qualifying any of those jobs. But I thought that even if there was any chance that I could get away from the desk or indoors, then that was where I wanted to be.
Okay. And I guess after spending time in Texas doing some of your medic training, what was like your first real assignment as like being part of the Army?
So I was stationed in Fort Polk, Louisiana. I actually failed to mention this, but maybe it's a little bit important to mention. I actually, after I finished with AIT in Fort Sam Houston, I actually got an airborne contract initially with my when I signed up with the recruiters. I had no idea like how the recruiter just asked me if I wanted to go to airborne school, and I was like, sure, I don't really know what that means, but I guess I'll go. So basically, I guess I spent about 3 weeks at Fort Benning, Georgia. And I actually don't tell anybody this. So this is actually one of the very first times I'm actually talking about it, because I didn't make it through, but there's actually a very interesting story behind that. So basically, and please let me know if this isn't necessary, but when I first arrived, I arrived with a cohort of people who had gone through AIT with me. A group of females who, we started to get along with and bond over because we were going to go to airborne school together. We had heard that we were in, and I don't know how much truth there was to this, but allegedly we were in we landed up in the cohort of airborne trainees who were among like the hardest or the strictest instructors, so that they would, a lot of people tended to fail under these instructors, and particularly females. And going through that, I think I definitely had a lot of imposter syndrome up until that point as well. But I remember, so basically at some point, I didn't make it through, and I had an opportunity and I was actually with a couple of other females who didn't make it through as well. But I remember we all found ourselves sitting in the office, and we were given the opportunity to sign these contracts or waivers or something written that asked us basically, do we want to join? Do we want to try again? And naively, I didn't have very much time to think. I was just sitting there, and I didn't know that was just those few minutes were enough for me to kind of like make my decision, or like that's all I had. I basically had this feeling inside where I didn't think I deserved it. And I thought that if I was going to ever get my airborne qualification, that I would have to go through the toughest instructors in order to feel like I actually earned it. And so I told myself, and I didn't just tell myself, I told these other girls too, that if I could come back after I get my assignment, I could go to airborne school, and I'm going to succeed, and it's not going to matter which instructors I have or which company I ended up in. And so I declined that offer to come back because I was like, I'm maybe just not ready, and I don't deserve it right now. Naively, I didn't realize how hard it would be to get that airborne assignment again, and how coveted that spot was. And I actually, in the remainder of my time in Fort Benning, when I was waiting to get another assignment, I had actually watched people that I had been outperforming pass and ended up getting their wings. And that was really formative for me for a lot of the decisions I made after, because I think there was a lot that I didn't think I deserved. But I vowed to never make such a decision ever again, in the way that I lived the rest of my life. Sorry, I know I kind of got off task.
It sounds like, and I don't want to put words in your, that maybe you were feeling that, but to some extent, is it fair to say that maybe the cards were stacked against you as well? That maybe systematically it would have been very difficult because they had put some of the harder instructors. Again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just wondering, it wasn't just you. There was almost like a push and a pull at the same time, right? Of it not being easy for you, or maybe the group that you were going with.
I actually have no idea, but I think it was, but I guess I never really believed that. Even if it was the case, I guess I kind of felt like a point of pride for me to only feel like I succeeded if I went through the toughest instructors. So Actually, I have no idea. Yeah. I wouldn't characterize it as that. I think
Okay,
it
good.
was more, yeah, a question of opportunity, how I perceived opportunity and how much I deserved it.
It's a
And so,
really interesting story. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. After that segment, what was your first assignment?
So then I landed in Fort Polk, Louisiana, and I can't tell you the number of people who still to this day apologize for me for ending up there. So it's one of those things where it's like it's like pity. It's hilarious. I had no idea leading up to it. I had no idea what people really were referencing either. When I got there, I I honestly didn't mind it very much. I mean, I was near the water. I was in Louisiana. I was near Texas, and what I loved about Fort Polk was that even in being like, I think there was so much opportunity for me to experience a whole different culture that was very, very different than what I had come from. And I had good food along with it.
Nice. And what were some of your duties at that base? Was it more training, or were you actually helping people with your medic skills?
Both. I was really lucky. I had a wide breadth of experiences, both as a medic and as a soldier. So I started out working in the aid station, and really just practicing those fresh medic skills I had just learned from AIT. And I was working alongside other more experienced medics in the clinic as well. Worked with PAs, saw patients, um, gave them treatments. I also, and then after following my time in the aid station. Oh, actually, I should probably mention my unit. So I was stationed I was assigned to Charlie Company, 94th BSB in the 4th Brigade Mountain Division when I had arrived. And it has since been, I think, reflagged as Charlie Company 710th BSB in the 3rd Brigade 10th Mountain Division. Anyway, so I was in a light infantry unit, and I was in the medic company of like the brigade support battalion. And so I think like just by nature of that, like I did have experience working in the aid station, but I also had a lot of support roles outside of it as well. Outside of like my rotations in the clinic. So I was working in the motor pool. I was taking inventories. And doing a lot of things in between, just that had nothing to do with what I imagined the military to be.
Do you care to expand upon that? Like how your expectations were, I guess, a little altered than the reality?
Yeah. So I guess one is I didn't really know what to expect. I never really took the time to imagine what a day-to-day life of a soldier would be in the first place. But I found myself, I guess, always preparing to train, then training, then taking inventories and doing a lot of what seemed to be a lot of busy work. I witnessed a lot of resources being wasted and a lot of things that doing things that I questioned why we were doing. But like mopping cement. But at the same time, yeah, I don't know. It was just it was and landscaping. We did a lot of landscaping. But I outside of that, in terms of training, I myself, of course, was training. Always refreshing well, not always, but we would do refreshers on our medical skills. We would be training the more junior soldiers. We would be, maintaining our, fundamentals that we learned in basic training, such as, shooting and qualifying for those such things. We did a lot of, this is so part of the inefficiency, and which I didn't think was very effective. We did a lot of, compliance training that really didn't mean much to a lot of people online. It was,
Cool.
Oh, and I also did a rotation in the hospital as well, in addition to the aid station when I got back from Afghanistan.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit, I guess, transitioning into how like you got deployed and when that exactly occurred in the timeline?
So I had arrived in my unit in April 2014, and I deployed to Afghanistan in, I think, June 2015 with actually a different company than what I was assigned to. I was considered on loan to another company and another battalion. So I ended up deploying with the 230 infantry, 230th Infantry Battalion. So that was basically, as it sounds, it was an infantry battalion. And I was one of two female medics from the Charlie Company from 94th BSB who had deployed with the infantry soldiers, which is a little bit uncharacteristic. But we ended up getting assigned to this small little tactical base in the middle of another. So we ended up getting assigned to tactical base Gamberry, which was a little base within which was a NATO base within an Afghan National Army base. So it was a base within a base, is like what I like to say. And we actually measured it, and it was like just like a mile round in circumference. And there, I was basically working in the clinic most days.
And do you mind explaining a little bit about like what was occurring like at that point in the war, and kind of like the United States' involvement in Afghanistan up to that point, and I guess how that kind of shaped like your mindset while you were over there?
Yeah. So we were deployed under Operation Resolute Support. And at that time, we were supporting the NATO's effort in training, advising, and assisting the Afghan National Army counterparts. So this was an effort that was primarily done by officers, and they would get with their ANA counterparts and, train, advise, and assist them. And the infantry would do the same with, their infantry forces. And so as a medic, though, like for my specific duties, especially as a female, and at this time, there were no females technically allowed in combat or in combat roles, even though, of course, there were females in the past who had gone and were in combat. I was working in the aid station for the most part.
And were you working alongside like Afghani soldiers or other medics, or were you mainly like helping the United States as troops?
So very limited interactions with the Afghan National Army medics and soldiers, but lots of interactions with NATO soldiers. So on that base, that was primarily made up of course, U.S. soldiers, Sri Lankan special forces, Polish soldiers, and the occasional maybe like a UK soldier or somebody else from NATO. But those are that was the primary presence.
And I guess what were your duties while you were there? What were you assigned to do?
So I was mostly just a clinical medic. So I was just basically, most of the patients that we were seeing were very routine. Malaria is rampant there, so we had the occasional soldier with malaria. It was pretty routine stuff. We did a lot of training. We did train with the other NATO soldiers. We did some combat life-saving training with them and kind of showed them like the ways that we were doing stuff. And then alongside that, of course, there's always the little sprinkle of just random soldierly duties that they have, every random enlisted soldier do. Oh, no, I also had like this unofficial role of coordinating flights for providers from different bases. So the base that we were on was also where the general, or the one-star general was living. So we had some ancillary providers also flying in pretty regularly to our base. So I would kind of be like the ad hoc or like the unofficial flight coordinator for all of that.
While you were, I guess, doing all this, was there ever, most of this was pretty like routine work, pretty safe work, but was there ever like scary situations where like your base was the threat of an ambush or something like that?
Yeah, we've definitely had a couple of scary moments, but for the most part, so to start is, but nobody throughout my whole time in Afghanistan, nobody that I knew and nobody on our base died from combat related reasons. So very, very grateful for that. We did take a lot of, rockets and like, those kinds of warnings. And we had, some like land inside our base, some close calls. But fortunately, everybody, for the most part, was pretty good. We did have a couple of incidents, especially like there was one specifically, I remember when we were just right outside our base, there was, I guess, like an incident over in the ANA side of the base where I guess like like, I'm sure maybe it was like IDF or something, but a lot of our infantry soldiers got concussed or were at risk of concussion, so that from a blast. But other than that, I think everybody was pretty much okay. Oh, something I had forgotten. Sorry about that. Alongside the train, advise, and assist roles, part of the things that I had done outside of my clinical duties, which is kind of comical now recalling it, but we had I had the privilege of escorting or joining the infantry soldiers and escorting them as a medic over to the Afghan National Army side of the base. So it was actually interesting because while it was not quite the combat patrol, I think everybody was very high alert during just those escorts because, and again, this is very anecdotal, but I think the level of trust between who was in the Afghan National Army and who was, not just actually like in the, just there trying to infiltrate the ANA as Taliban. I don't think, or like, or as ISIS or whatever those other forces, people who not with great intentions. I think that put people on edge because there had been some incidences before where such people actually, killed American soldiers just right before our arrival, actually. Anyway, so I had the privilege of escorting some of those officers and those forces, our NATO forces, over to the ANA side. That was it.
Cool. And then I have a few questions kind of related to a school project I'm doing. It's about underrepresented voices in the military. And I was kind of wondering, you don't have to speak on this if you don't want to, but I'd be interested to hear if you could speak a little bit about like your experience as like an Asian American woman in the military and kind of what that was like for you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll go even all the way back to basic training, but I think throughout my time in the military, it was very interesting because I had grown up in a pretty diverse community and pretty lot, and where there were a lot of Asian Americans around me as well. So to come to basic training and just like throughout my time in the military, being told that I was often the first Asian person that people had met, first Asian woman, first Asian American, all of those things. I couldn't believe that I was that person to very many people. So that was, that was interesting. I think being a woman, for sure, I definitely, and being an Asian American woman, for sure, I think that was particularly unique, especially because I was born and raised here, which is also something that was interestingly unique. But I have to say, and it is just explicitly, like, I definitely was fetishized a lot of the times throughout my military career. And I think it just prompted a lot of reflection on, what that meant and what, for me as an Asian American woman and serving in the military, and, what that, I don't know, I reflected on it a lot. But at the same time, in realizing, that my identity was not something that I could change, it was also something that I really embraced, because again, I think I was really embracing the whole restarting my whole sense of identity. And no matter how other people felt about me and how others perceived me, I think in whatever ways I could, I really leaned into the power of being a unique individual in whatever way that meant. So one notable occasion was when I was actually in Afghanistan, and realizing that holidays were over, and it would be a while before we would get to celebrate something else before we go home in the summer. And so I realized, Chinese New Year's around the corner. Why don't I do something and kind of bring the whole base together? So we had access to printers. I had my sister mail me some things from home, and I basically created these little cards where it was just like these. It was just a piece of paper with like greetings in English, Sri Lankan, Polish, and in Arabic. But then they were written out in westernized, written out phonetically in our alphabet. And I put these little slips into red envelopes, and I went to the little bazaar just like right outside the clinic, and got I exchanged a few American dollars for like multiple bills in like Afghan currency. And I passed them out around the base to basically everybody until I ran out of red envelopes. And it was just really sweet seeing people, actually greeting each other, using these little slips together. Because that was the other thing, is that realizing how unique I was to people, especially on that base, being not only one of the only females on the base, but I was the youngest, only Asian woman on the base as well. One of the lowest ranking people. I knew that I don't know. I just knew that it was, my uniqueness was not something I could escape. And just me being who I am, I enjoy interacting with people anyway. So even leading up to that point, I had connected with so many people from so many different armies, and so many personal and individual interactions, that just passing out those red envelopes was my way of hoping that others would kind of break out of their own little bubbles and shells and interact more with each other. And that was what I witnessed.
Sounds like you were able to use your uniqueness to connect with people in unexpected ways, which I think is really powerful, probably for yourself, but also for people who want to, learn more and maybe had not had an opportunity to. So sounds like you really, I think, took advantage of the situation.
I did. Thank you.
Would you say that since you had the unique experience of working with NATO forces, were there other women in, say, the Polish or the Sri Lankan cohorts, or did they not send women, I guess, to your base?
No women.
So it really was just the U.S. and you. And so if you were to quantify it, how many women would have been kind of there at the same time? If we could try to just appreciate what the numbers look like.
Oh, yeah. So I would say even a low estimate, maybe 300 males to less than 10 women.
Oh my goodness.
And there were uniformed women. I could maybe 5, maybe less than 5 at times. But the other women that would show up on base would usually be contractors if they ever came through.
Wow. So you were one of 5, you're saying?
Yes.
Wow.
And one other question I had, given that you were fighting in Afghanistan against like the Taliban, who were like a group who, I guess, severely oppress women and have like a lot of sexist ideologies, did knowing that like your aid was going to help women like live lives without this persecution, did that ever like maybe spark some inspiration in you to like keep going in like moments where it was kind of hard?
Yeah. So I didn't have any explicit moments where I felt like I needed that motivation. It was certainly something that I had, never forgotten and something I'd kept in mind. But it was also something that was, strangely enough, despite being in Afghanistan, still felt very much at a distance for me because of the nature of my experience. The closest I would really get to, kind of reflecting on gender, it wasn't so much about other people at that point because, again, it was a little bit distant, but it was when I was doing those little escorts over to the ANA side, because it was very clear. Well, not only was I just this tiny little blob in armor, just like little chunk like of camo just walking alongside these like very big tall men, but I also had a little big fat hair bun right behind me too that very clearly I was an anomaly, and very, very clearly I was a female.
Cool.
So I was just going to say, when you went to the other side, were you ever able to interact with them? It sounds like you probably felt the looks when people would probably notice you the bun, but was there any opportunity where you maybe did have a chance to chat with them, or were you always kind of at somewhat of an arm's length?
I did have I did have a couple of interactions with them. Well, so on the usual walks, they were a bit more of a spooky kind of vibe, I think, because everybody was armed, and just kind of like realizing that I was in a very vulnerable spot, and not only as a medic, because they always get the medic first, but as a woman. So that was interesting. But in the interactions that I had with the train advice and assist side, I actually had a mentor on base who was working with civil affairs, and he had actually invited me along to one of his sessions with his counterparts. And so the first time he ever took me, he was like, okay, we're going to trick my counterpart into thinking that, and tell him that you're actually a Tajik because you have your Asian, which is an ethnicity. And I guess he told me that Tajiks usually look a bit more Asian or East Asian and have those kinds of features. So he would give me a headscarf and just tell his counterpart that I was a Tajik woman visiting and coming along for the ride, and I guess that he thought that was a funny interaction. But
In camo?
in yeah, I think so. I don't even remember what I was wearing, but I guess he bought it, and I don't know. It was just like a really funny interaction to them. That's all I really remember.
Interesting. Well, how did you, after serving all that time in Afghanistan, I guess, transition back into like normal civilian life? Was it easy for you, or did you find it difficult?
Actually, I'm so sorry. I just realized I did have more interactions with. I actually, it was the interactions that I had with locals or Afghans. Generally were not part of the military, but they were certainly a very big part of my experience while I was living on base. Um, and I'm sorry, would you mind repeating the question again?
Yeah, no problem. After serving like all that time in Afghanistan, was it easy for you, like when coming back to just a civilian life, or did you find it difficult?
Um, Funny enough, I had I was I did not curse at all leading up to my time in the military, throughout my time in the military, until my very last week of before I was about to come home to the States after Afghanistan. I remember I just, for whatever reason, I picked up, I just let it all out. Swore like a sailor, basically. I mean, I was in the army, but yeah. Anyway, that was honestly, I think that was the biggest transition for me personally. But other than like, just now suddenly just cursing a lot, there was no major transition for me that I found particularly difficult.
And what were the exact like dates you remember, like when you officially left? And did you like stay on reserves, or did you just leave the military as a whole?
I left the military as a whole.
And did you, I guess, take some time to spend time with your family, or did you immediately like try and find a job, or what was like kind of life after the military like for you?
So after I came back, I don't know if this is worth saying, but after I came back from my deployment, I was actually a newlywed. I had just gotten married right before our deployment. Uh, then when we came back, um, all of a sudden we were living together. I was a wife. And then so my husband had gotten out a few months after we had returned from Afghanistan, and then I was still on active duty. So during that time, I guess I I gave a I guess the transition wasn't too difficult, but we spent a few months after I got out, um, going back to Illinois to visit his parents, lived with them for a little bit to get our things together to prepare for school, and then we traveled for about a month to the Philippines and Hong Kong, where my family's from, and then I started school in January 2018.
And are both you and your husband both part of the university program that are for veteran alums? Is that the right term? Or maybe you could talk a little bit about kind of the, I guess, degrees that you and your husband are getting.
So we both started at College of San Mateo. I don't think we weren't officially part of any sort of university programs, but we did use our GI Bill for those throughout our time in community college. But and yeah, no formal university programs. But when I was in community college and I was preparing to apply, well, I was applying to different four-year universities when that time came around. I did come across an incredible nonprofit called Service to School, which is essentially signing up as an applicant. I would be paired with an ambassador who would have come from one of my top universities that of choice that I was looking to apply to. And they would essentially act as a sort of a mentor or another ear or somebody to lean on throughout the college application process, because definitely veterans have had no idea of how to apply to, four-year universities, let alone private universities. And honestly, it was really only because of that organization that I even considered applying to Stanford or any other school.
Sounds like a great organization.
Yeah, it was great.
And then maybe you can talk a little bit about the work that you're doing now, because it sounds like you've been able to kind of pull the veteran thread into your life at Stanford.
Yes. So first is actually, and I don't know if Charlie, you had already asked this, and maybe I didn't mention it, but I will start with, even after getting out, I did not feel like a soldier, a veteran, anybody. I just felt like I had all of these years of experience in witnessing things while in the military, but didn't really feel like a veteran, so to speak. It was not an identity I really leaned on, especially in community college. I just kind of felt like me again. Not that it had really gone away, but I was actually not very involved with veteran related efforts while I was in community college, other than just occasionally visiting the Veteran Center. But when I came to Stanford, a really big part of why I guess by the time I came to Stanford, I had reflected a lot on my veteran identity, and I think really just even candidly, like when I came to Stanford, I was looking for communities to kind of latch onto because I was a non-traditional student, and wanted to find an easy way to kind of get to like build a community and feel a sense of belonging. And admiring all the work that other Stanford veterans had done before me, leading up to my arrival, I felt obligated to pay it forward and get involved in whatever way I could, whatever that entailed. And it is a very complicated story about the Stanford military affiliated communities since I've arrived and since I've been studying here. But what has remained is my commitment and drive to break down the institutional barriers and personal barriers that we create for ourselves for veterans who are looking to transition to higher education, and specifically to historically, or just colleges that veterans historically have not gone to, especially enlisted veterans, and empowering them to apply because it is certainly feasible.